Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second annual Rainier View Christian Church Year in Review Round Table Discussion. We are so glad that you've joined us. We're going to kick off some time together with some introductions, and then we're going to take some time to look back at this last year. What moments in our teaching series or in the life of our church really stuck out to us, and we are so excited to get to spend this time talking together. So I'll have you guys introduce yourselves, share what your titles are. I don't know why I couldn't remember what that word was. Your job title. And then what is a highlight or two from this last year? And it can be personal or it can be churchy vibes. So I'm Erica. I am our Graham student ministry pastor, and I'm one of our teaching pastors here on staff. And my highlights for the last year were I got to go on vacation again. Oh, so fun. Just some really fun places. And then I also got to take my students back to camp. And just nothing beats camp in student ministry. So it was the best. It was so good. So I don't care. You guys can rock, paper, scissors for it.
You want rock, paper, scissors?
Sure.
Oh my gosh, yes.
All right. 1, 2, 3.
Oh.
Ooh.
Wow.
All right. Paper wins. So I guess I need to pick which one. I'll go first. Highlight of the year for me, our son getting his driver's license.
Yeah.
That, man, is a game changer in terms of, family getting around, all that. So that's a personal win. Otherwise, church-wise, I just think hitting all of those year milestones in a normal way, right?
Yeah.
Kind of Christmas and Easter and, like you said, camps and really just feeling again, not trying to get back to the way things were before, but being able to move forward. Probably one of the highlights of my year. I love VBS, and so just having so many kids in the building for a week. We have such an amazing group of volunteers that show up for that week, and so it's so powerful. Helping kids understand who God is and understand the gospel in the way it makes sense for a child. And so those are kind of some highlights for me.
And what is your name and what do you do here?
Oh, yes. My name is Jeff Jamba, and I lead out here at our Graham campus at Rainier View and a part of our teaching team.
Awesome.
Well, hi, happy 2023. My name is Joe. I am the Parkland campus pastor, also part of the teaching team here. Highlights for 2022, got to go on vacation as well.
Yeah!
Went off to Pismo Beach with Jill and two of our friends. So that was a really great time. We went to the Wizarding World in Universal Studios, and it was really great. And then as far as church goes, Pie and Praise, or Praise and Pie, that was a huge...
That was a good night.
Cool thing for me. So.
Oh, that was awesome. So through this time together, we'll stop and look at the different series that we covered through the lens of really superlatives. So what were the things that stood out to us and different things like that? So the first question is, what was the series or the sermon that was hardest for you to write?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Probably, I know this is kind of dumb to say, but
no,
I think the hardest one for me was the one I wrote for, what was it? It's pursuing unity in a polarized world, or?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because that was technically my interview. So,
yes, and that would be, you had some extra.
That was a tough one to write, not only because not knowing the community.
Yeah.
But also, I think Jeff was the one who contacted me, and he was like, you're going to write on Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit, which, fun fact, I've never preached on Paul up to that point.
What?
And, going to seminary, one of the things you learn is Paul is a brilliant, individual. He's trilingual. He has all this educational background. He's throwing Old Testament in there like crazy, allusions and metaphors. And so, that was, the book choice was a really, tall order. The topic was how do we have unity?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, oh, by the way, this isn't an interview, but it is your interview, right? So definitely one of the hardest.
Well, you crushed it.
Obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. You crushed it because you're sitting here. So way to go.
So we're grateful.
Yeah.
Hardest series for me to write. I think the series we've just been in at the end of the year here, Reconstruction, looking at Malachi, because prophetic books are so different than thinking about the New Testament letters, there's a logical flow, at least there's an argumentation that can be easily followed. Whereas the prophets often use, some word pictures, some visuals, the imagery can be difficult to understand and break down from, our context today from back then. And so I would say not only that, but really helping make it clear, like the questions that are asked here in Malachi that was, written to the 5th century BC people of God in Israel, like how to translate those well to our situation today and to see what cuts through as the timeless principles, which clearly are. But yeah, these were, some heavier topics in here. But it's interesting, right? Like some of the same struggles we have around, well, right, should I trust God with giving, right? Like we face the exact same struggles, but if I do, I don't have as much for myself. And so we find ourselves worshiping at the same kind of false ways and false places that the people of Israel did. But it was challenging to kind of also, like, the three of us divvy this up and figure out like, oh, like, okay, you're seeing it this way, and just land on I think it was kind of our first series that we all kind of collectively had to figure out how to navigate. And so there was a lot of revisions of the synopses and figuring out like, okay, what are we going to talk about over all 6 weeks? So it was a lot of work.
So I said the Reconstruction series because so in my role on the teaching team, I'm only preaching one sermon a series basically, and so I said Reconstruction was also my hardest sermon to write for the year, and it was for 2 reasons. One, because it was like we went back and forth as a team of like, okay, what do we actually want to say in this? What do we actually want to address? But I was talking about God and justice, and that is such like a deeply personal thing for so many people that not only was I nervous about like getting it theologically right, I also wanted to get it right in terms of like still being gracious if that is one of your primary struggles with God, but also like how can we help move you to what is the next thing? And I think that is so much of the heart in this Reconstruction series is all of us want to be theologically accurate, and we want to we want to be gracious to those who are struggling with these things. And we also want to say like, but here's your next step. If you're ready to take that next step, we have it for you. And that was a hard thing to balance. I mean, yeah, it was tricky. Yeah. Okay. Next question. What is the series that we have preached this year that has had a lasting impact on your life?
I want to go first. I could talk about on this one. I think for me, really this series that did have a lasting impact. The very beginning of the year, we did a series called Breaking the Cycle of Shame. And so we kind of just like, we're trying to, we plan ahead on the series we're going to do. And so we kind of like, we should do a series on shame. It kind of makes sense. The Bible speaks to this. People have this. But I think we had no idea the things people would share in this series and the scripts that they were holding on to of just deeply held things that were just so unbiblical in the sense of the way we view ourselves is not the way God views us.
Yeah.
And so we had people at one point like write down on slips of paper their shame scripts that they wanted to break free from.
Yeah.
And so, just anonymously. And so reading over hundreds of those and just feeling the weight and the burden of like, oh my gosh, we all are well aware of our shortcomings and our failures. And so for me, the shift and the change that I'll walk away with that is really kind of echoed in James 2, verse 13. We read this in verse 13, because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment. And so for me, like, of course I know that verse. Of course we talk about God's grace all of the time. But the pivot for me, the thing I will always take forward with me is seeing so many of the internal messages that not just people at large, but the people that are with us at Rainier View and all of you here, and just holding on to these scripts that just speak shame into your life and wanting you to experience freedom. Like we don't need to convince one another about our brokenness. That was my takeaway. We are well aware of our own brokenness.
Yeah.
What we need to convince one another of is our need for redemption and to speak those words of life to one another.
Yeah, I do have a quick follow-up question for you. That series, one of the things, it was so beautiful to read those things, but it was also really hard. Like we'd heard the hardest parts of some people's lives, the hardest parts of their stories. And in this day and age of like doom scrolling, we have constant access to that information of the saddest parts, the worst people's worst days. What do you do? What do you recommend to people in those moments? Because we had to like read it and then still go on with our days. Like that was Monday morning. We read all those. So what's your advice?
I mean, I'll begin and then, I want to hear what you have to say, Joe. But
yeah, we'll get to your answer for sure, Joe. It just tied into what he.
No worries.
Yeah, I think in Philippians 4, right? There's a passage that he talks about, do not be anxious about anything, picking up in verse 6 of Philippians 4. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I think really like committing to memory truth like that is so valuable. It's not that like you say it like a magic statement and it whisks away all the difficult things, but there's something to draw from in the midst of that. But then it's kind of like the action step isn't complete. In verse 8, it talks about, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things.
Yeah.
So I just think like auditing your what you consume, right? Whether that's media, whether that's the news, whether that's what we read or we watch, like just being mindful and aware of that is so important. So I would say I would start there with kind of retraining our minds, so to speak. So
good. Thank you. Okay. Now, Joe, which series has had a lasting impact on your life?
Yeah, for me, I think probably the series that stuck with me the most, probably Yes Regrets.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. And in particular, I would say the sermon about Judas, or the week on Judas.
Yeah, I remember that week.
I know, right?
Whose idea was that?
I don't know. Some guy that apparently works here. But, I think this sounds really weird to say it this way, but like, spending a week with Judas, right? And like trying to really get down to what were his motives, what were his concerns, why do you do the things he do, right? Like, I think it was really helpful in the sense of like, just kind of thinking through, I don't know, just kind of when you humanize him, right?
Yeah.
It helps to humanize other people in your life.
Yeah.
And when you, especially Erica, you were the one that said, let's compare Judas and Peter, right?
Yeah.
That was really helpful for me because I think sometimes I get into a place of like, I'm not in a place where I can turn this around, right? Or people might be in that place, right? Where they might feel like, well, I've messed up so much, or I'm just not right with God to a certain degree that there's just no way I can be acceptable again, right? And just maybe playing with that thought of, but what if Judas did turn, right? As Jeff put it, right? What if Judas didn't just stay there? And I think that's, I don't know, for me at least, like, I'm not saying like I've done Judas level things, but I also don't think this is a comparison game either.
Yeah.
I think even in our own personal ways, we get into those moments of like, I've really failed Jesus in my life, right? I've really failed to follow him. And I think, as we talked about Judas, as we talked about Peter, that was really helpful for me, a good reminder for me, like, you might be a teaching pastor and all that, but like even we have moments where we feel like we don't got it together, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. There's grace in that. So
we have so many moments like that.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think an encouragement, right, to not like do sin ranking, like sin power rankings, and like, well, as long as you're not in the top 10, then you're okay. Like, well, I know I should, maybe be more encouraging, or I shouldn't, yell at my kids out of my own frustration and anger, or fill in the blank with whatever. But they're like, well, but I'm not Judas, right? And so it's like how easy it is for us to, miss that, like, in our humanity, we all face really the same temptation, the same struggles, the same shortcomings, in essence of like, no, we don't measure up to what God calls us to, none of us. And so everything is really just his grace enabling us to, again, be able to live the kind of life that's going to honor him. So,
yeah, for sure. Oh my goodness. The series that has had a lasting impact on me was when we did like our relationship series, and I talked about like singleness, and I had to like work through a lot of like my own baggage, for lack of a better phrase, around like being single. But the number of people that have come to me and have been like, thank you so much, because I've literally never heard a pastor talk about I've never heard a single pastor talk about singleness. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so I think Jeff wants me to start like a podcast about it. I don't know that I'm quite there, but I feel less weird about it. And so it really has truly shifted and changed some things for me, which is a delight, a dream. Okay. What is a series that you saw have the most impact on other people's lives? And I'm going to jump in here because it's the same one that Jeff just mentioned, which is Breaking the Cycle of Shame. I have sat with so many people who have come back to church for the first time since the pandemic, who have come back to church for the first time since some sort of falling out or terrible thing happening, insert whatever it is, and they've said like, and I just haven't been able to be back to church, and I feel bad that I haven't been able to be back to church, and I feel all of these other, insert negative emotions here. And I get to look at them and I say, okay, I need you to know that like God doesn't look at you that way. And I need you to know that we don't look at you that way here at Rainier View. We actually did a whole series on it. And here's how much we don't look at you that way. And so then I have been able to use this resource and pass it on to other people. And it has helped them to find freedom and healing. And then there have been people who have said, I was on the fence about, Big C church and heard that there was a church that was talking about this and was addressing this in this way. And I thought that I could be there. And so I think this idea of breaking the cycle of shame has created some freedom for our people, like true, authentic, like freedom in Jesus, not, I can do whatever because God's not going to judge me. But a freedom of like, I can give up these things that I thought would hold me back for the entirety of my life because that's not actually how God views me. And I just think it's been so beautiful to see that ripple across our community. So, okay. And you guys, I don't know, you can rock, paper, scissors for it again, or just jump in.
Jump in.
Yeah,
just
jumping
in over and over, right? Yep. For me, the one that I saw having the most impact, strangely enough, was the sermon on giving that we just did a month ago, right?
Yeah, so much good
by
feedback.
the way, have you noticed I got the sermon on Judas and then I got to preach on giving, and then this month you'll see what I got to preach on next. But I think Jeff's out to get me or something, but he controls our calendar. But
no, because I think at the start of the year, maybe I should save this for later.
Yeah.
I think at the start of the year, I had to talk about circumcision 3 sermons in a row. So.
But notice who's not preaching any of these. Just kidding. Jeff is doing it on the gram side. I just don't see it. So, but anyways, believe it or not, since I've been here at Rainier View, the most amount of feedback I've gotten from people was after that sermon.
Really?
Yeah. And there would be feedback such as I used to be guilted in church. And I feel like you've really shifted the paradigm, right, of how giving is not about I need to do a certain amount, but everything belongs to God and this is out of gratitude, right? I have had people say this has really changed the way I view God. Or just in general, it's a really hard topic we've seen done really poorly, and you and Jeff really knocked it out of the park, right? And so that, I don't know, I've been dreading that one, or I was dreading that one during that week, right? And I was like, this is the one where people are going to be like, oh, I don't know why we hired Joe, right? I thought this was definitely going to be it. And surprise, this is the one where people are like, leaving nice emails and like pulling me aside during the week and saying like, hey, we're so glad that you talked on this. We're so glad Jeff talked on this. We feel a lot better about what it means to worship with our finances.
Yeah, because remind me how long you've been on staff.
Well, it'd be 4 months now.
Dang, 4 months. And you've had to, you had a couple doozies there. Yeah. Dang, impressive. I have heard really great things also about what you guys preached on that topic. So way to go, you guys. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a ton else to add. I mean, both those are, ones I've seen fruit in people's lives, and would just kind of, echo both those things. Like, again, wanting people to experience freedom and just how often, and again, I want to underscore too, like, so much of it is unintentional, right? Like, I don't think like there's some church that's sitting there with like pastors saying, let's figure out how to make church terrible for people. Like, nobody's sitting there. I mean, maybe somewhere, right? There's like, yes, there's those like...
There's always 5% of people that do have malicious intent.
Yeah, check out the link below. There is no link. Maybe.
Man, I had to practice so much sanctification to not open my mouth and insert, here's the links you can put here.
I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, so, but I would just, that they're unintentional things, but that all the more that we just, again, view ourselves first and foremost as individuals who are in need of God's grace, and that we can provide that to one another when we come together at church, and we can encourage one another. And so why it's not like church ought not be a chore. It's actually like we get to be the body of Christ, as it says in 1 Corinthians 12, to one another. And that means like, I have something to bring to the table and to contribute to the lives of others that brings health and well-being. And so, I saw that in both those sermons and the series that we've been talking about.
Yeah. And this is not a question I've prepped either of you for, so feel free to be like, will not answer. When we walk with people towards health, we oftentimes then have to have really hard conversations with them, whether it's because they've come to us and said, I want to talk about this really difficult thing, or you've realized this is someone who I care about who is saying they want to follow Jesus, and we're trying to address this thing and it's not getting through to them. And so we have to approach them for kind of a hard conversation. How do you guys prep for hard conversations? Because I think one of the things that people find is, okay, I've started moving towards freedom. I've started having this freedom in Jesus, and I want to walk with my friends in this. And when I walk with my friends in this, they will share really hard things with me, and I do not always know like how to handle it well, or I might have to actually address something that I think is really harmful or unhealthy in their life, and I don't know what to do. So do you guys have any words of wisdom?
I would say for me that I don't, and maybe it's something that just comes with, I've been in ministry now a couple decades, so something that just comes with time. But I don't view myself as the person who's going to fix their problem. Like I am merely somebody who can be a helpful guide, help point in a direction. But ultimately, the Bible calls us to be like witnesses, to represent Jesus well, and that's what we're called to do. And then to trust that God's Spirit is going to, use that moment, that interaction, but that I'm not responsible in the ultimate sense, like whether or not somebody's marriage makes it, whether or not, somebody experiences greater peace at home, whether or not somebody resolves the tension they have around, understanding the Bible better, or part of it that they disagree with. That's actually not my job. That's the job of the Holy Spirit. And so then I'm just faithful in that moment, in that interaction. And that's been super helpful to enter into a difficult conversation. And then secondly, always just leaving the door open for further discussion, letting people know I'm always here to talk more. I'm always here that, that people know that the relationship doesn't change or end based upon, if you pass the test by like, doing what I said or whatever, that the relationship is you can come back anytime. So those have been two helpful things for me.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, I would say, in addition to everything Jeff just said, which I think is really great, as pastors, like we do need to kind of put on a raincoat, right? It's kind of how Jill describes it in her psychology terms, but you kind of
shout out to Jill.
Have all the rain come down, and then you take off the raincoat, and then you have to kind of go about your day, right? Not in a less than
that's genius.
Not like because you don't have empathy. It's because like you are hearing a lot of stories, a lot of people coming to you. So there just has to be a way where you say, I'm not the superhero, Jesus is, right? Yeah. I think the other thing that I was going to add was just that I think difficult conversations require a lot of time, a lot of listening, and a lot of discernment of when do you affirm and say, I hear that, and when do you kind of push boundaries a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because I think even Jesus does this a little bit, right? Where I think there's one healing in the book of John where Jesus's question is, do you want to be well?
Yeah.
Right? Which sounds really cruel.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes that's the question you need to ask in these contexts, right? Because we can give you all the advice, all the tools, all the resources, all the compassion and empathy, right? But at some point there comes a moment in dialoguing with someone, in having a difficult conversation with someone, where you have to say like, hey, at some point you have to make a choice of like, is wellness what I want to pursue? And often we are resistant to wellness because wellness requires change, and change is uncomfortable, right?
Yes.
And I'm not just talking about people I've had conversations with. I'm talking about myself, and in the process I've been through, receiving pastoral care in my own situation, having been in therapy in my own situation. Like it's difficult work, right? And so not just for the pastor, but for people receiving pastoral care as well. So a lot of patience and a lot of discernment for sure is part of the process.
Yeah. And then our final question for our time together, and then there will be a podcast, a part 2 of this that won't be on video, but that you can catch the Rbcc podcast online, is what do you hope for Rbcc in 2023?
We'll start with Erica.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's just go down the line.
Yeah. I hope in 2023, Rainier View continues to be a church where people find true, authentic hope and freedom in Jesus. And we continue to be a church that steps into our communities, like the needs of our communities, that we show up for them really, really well. I think after having some conversations with counselors through the giving wall that we've done at the Graham campus, we have learned so much about, I think people think that Graham has no needs or significantly fewer needs, but the needs in Graham are actually rising exponentially. And there are very few places and resources in Graham to actually engage with those needs really, really well. And I think that if we continue to be a church where people are finding hope and freedom in Jesus, because we are being filled with Jesus, like that is who we're drawing our energy, our source, and our love from, then we're going to be so eager to share it with our community and in all of the resources that it needs. So, yeah.
For me, my hope for Rainier View in 2023 is that we would be a manna church. So like manna as in like, the bread that God brings in the wilderness, right? And the people say, we're going to call this manna because that translates to what is it, right? and Jesus calls himself the bread of life, right? And so he identifies himself with this manna, which, a lot of people are looking at Jesus saying, what is he, right? And that's something I've appreciated about Rainier View already just in my short time here. During Winterfest last month, I had an interaction, and by we, I mean Rusty and I, where this lady came up to me and she was like, so I've been, kicked out of church, basically shunned because I have this opinion and I voted this way. And so my question to you all is, if I come to your church, what am I going to be allowed to be and what am I going to be not allowed to do, right?
Whoa.
And I just remember Rusty going silent because he's like, okay, here's the test. You're 4 months in. How are you going to answer this? He's just watching, right? Like a supervisor. And I basically just told her.
Coach mode.
Coach mode. He's like, all right, we practiced this in practice, right? So, and my reply, it was so great to be able to tell her, you know what? Honest, honest answer here is that you can probably be a member here. You could probably be baptized here. You can probably take communion with us. You can probably be in community groups. You can probably be in leadership. In fact, you will probably be accepted, for who you are, right?
Yeah.
Because guess what? There are people who agree with you. There are people who disagree with you. And they're not just in the congregation. They might even be in the leadership, right? And I think there are so many conversations I've had like that where whether it's with new people, current congregants, or even friends and family members where they're just like, what kind of church is this? Right? You guys are Restoration.
Yeah, that's true.
But not really. You guys baptize like the Baptists. You do communion, but it's not really all that Presbyterian, but your government is very Presbyterian. and sometimes you're Pentecostal, depending on who's leading. And I love that. I love that about Rainier View, is just that you can't box in this community.
No, you cannot.
And I think that is the work of the Spirit, right? Yeah. When you can't box it in. And when you can't box it in, right, that means other people feel like I can be here. And that's what I want to see continue in 2023 is we are that. What kind of church is it? What is it? And the only answer can be it's the work of the Spirit, making this community flourish.
So good.
Oh, I have to add something after that.
You can just say ditto.
Yeah, ditto.
Amen. Like, did I sign the cross right? I don't know. Like, you can see, like, yeah. That's not part of my faith tradition background, but and kind of piggybacking off of that in the sense of the what is it that we would view Jesus and sharing faith in our communities and our cities, not like as, ammunition to be spread out there, but as an invitation for people to gather around the living water, if we view Jesus that way increasingly. And that we would just be like all in on the simplicity of the gospel driving us, and like the mission of just, we want as many other people to be introduced to the good news of Jesus and to take next steps of faith when it comes to pursuing and following in the way of Jesus in their life. And that just becomes the driver, and that shows up in our words and our actions. And we don't let a lot of sideshows and, like just extra things crowd out that space and confuse things. Like, let's just keep focused on the simplicity of the gospel and presenting that and being faithful to live that out in the ways that God calls us to. But again and again and again, returning to, that's our foundation, that's our core, that's what's going to drive us. And then just seriously wanting to reach people with the good news, and not just being happy with, well, we like each other and we're in the room, and so that's all that matters. It's like, no, like we, Pierce County's got about, approaching 1 million people living in it. And so how are we doing helping point people to the hope and the joy and the faith and the new life that can be found in Jesus, and taking that seriously, and just meeting the needs that are unmet, and extending the invitations to those who aren't here yet, and doing so boldly and unapologetically, and not having the, pride that we can reach everyone, but being unapologetic about, but reaching the people we can, meeting the needs that we can, and just, let's get started. Let's just go. We don't have to overthink this. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for talking with us. And Rainier View, we want to thank you. We want to thank you for being part of this with us, for being on this journey, for walking with us as we pursue God and we engage in community and we make a difference as we are working towards every neighborhood in Pierce County being engaged by believers and transformed by Jesus. And we are so excited to get to do this with you. So 2023 is going to rock. Foreshadowing predictions for 2023, it's going to rock. And I can't wait for what is in store. So we will see you next Sunday. Bye.